Hey, tonight we're going to journey back to the 1920s, to a world of flashing neon signs, hidden speakeasies, and jazz music so hot it could melt the snow off the rooftops. But we're not here to talk about flappers and bootleggers. We're here to talk about the last lost secret of Prohibition, a code hidden in the sheet music of a famous jazz standard that funded a massive illegal political machine. A code that was nearly discovered by a young, deaf FBI agent obsessed with rhythm. Chicago, 1928. The Silence and the Beat. The city of Chicago in 1928 was a study in contradictions, a vibrant roar of progress overlaid with the deadly silence of organized crime. Few people understood this duality better than Agent Elias Vance. Vance was an anomaly within J. Edgar Hoover's nascent Bureau of Investigation, the FBI's predecessor. He was just 25, fiercely intelligent, and profoundly deaf since a childhood fever. He processed the world through vibration, reading lips, and an uncanny ability to decipher patterns, especially rhythmic ones. Vance was working undercover, his cover a mild-mannered music critic for a struggling downtown newspaper. His target was the Velvet Syndicate, a colossal organization that had grown far beyond simple bootlegging. Led by the shadowy Maestro, the syndicate controlled Chicago's liquor supply, its dock workers, and, most disturbingly, several state legislators. Vance wasn't interested in the barrels of rye or the stacks of cash. He was interested in how the Maestro moved political favors, secret messages, and the enormous bulk of his finances without using a telephone or leaving a paper trail. The speakeasy and the sheet music. Vance's investigation led him nightly to the Blue Chord, a speakeasy hidden beneath a legitimate Italian bakery. The club was opulent, a dizzying mix of red velvet curtains and brass fixtures, and it was the syndicate's unofficial headquarters. The heart of the Blue Chord was its music. Every night, the house band, the Syncopators, played one particular song at precisely 1 a.m. Midnight Echo, a popular jazz standard written by the band's piano player, Solomon "Solly" Green. The song was a hit, known for its mournful trumpet solo and complex driving rhythm. One night, while observing the club's manager, Vance noticed a peculiar pattern. As Solly Green played Midnight Echo, a well-dressed man, a politician, Senator Aleister Crowley, sat in the corner. Crowley wasn't tapping to the main beat. He was tapping to the cymbal crashes that punctuated the piano's melody. Vance felt the vibrations through the wooden floor. The cymbal crashes were not random flourishes. They followed an irregular, calculated sequence. He managed to steal a discarded piece of sheet music for Midnight Echo from the trash. Back in his rented room, Vance laid the sheet music out, tapping his fingers on the worn page. He realized the written notes for the piano melody and the percussion were contradictory. Where the piano part suggested a smooth transition, the percussion part included inexplicable, isolated beats, dots placed where no drummer would naturally hit. Vance focused on the cymbal marks, converting the hits and rests into a simple binary code, a series of ones and zeros. The coded message. After hours of work, Vance translated the first line of the cymbal pattern. The result was chilling. GAMBLEARNYC 320. It was a betting instruction, a logistics note, and a date. The music wasn't just entertainment. It was a daily encrypted transaction record for the syndicate. But the real breakthrough came when he looked at the second layer of the code, the song's chord structure. The official sheet music used standard A minor and E7 chords. But Vance remembered watching Solly Green play. Green often substituted the official chord in the third bar with an unusual, dissonant F diminished chord. a chord that gave the song its signature melancholic pull. Vance hypothesized that the F diminished chord itself was the key. It signaled a change in the meaning of the rhythmic code. It turned the gambling note into a political directive. He applied the chord shift to the translated message and gasped when he saw the new result. E, L, E, C, T, R, O, W, L, E, Y, F, U, N, D, N, Y, C, D, O, C, M, S, T, E, R. The syndicate was not just financing the local politician, Senator Crowley. They were actively installing a New York City dockmaster to control a major port, a move that would grant them uninhibited national distribution. The Velvet Syndicate was actively undermining the entire U.S. political and economic structure, using jazz music as their silent, unbreakable encryption system. Vance had found the Velvet Code, but the information was too explosive to transmit over the insecure telegraph. See, he was alone, surrounded by the Maestro's network, and holding the key to the most powerful criminal organization in America. Agent Elias Vance's discovery of the Velvet Code, the encrypted instructions hidden within the midnight echo sheet music, left him in a state of hyper-alert paranoia. Infrastructure. The immediate threat. Vance knew he couldn't trust the local Chicago police, who were almost certainly on the Maestro's payroll, where he could hand the evidence directly to the Bureau. He meticulously photographed the original sheet music and his decryption notes using a miniature camera hidden inside a matchbox. The originals, however, were too precious and fragile to trust to the mail. He decided to carry the crucial sheet music with him, tucked inside a rolled-up magazine. As he was packing, a sudden, powerful vibration shook the floorboards of his apartment, a vibration that spoke not of street traffic, but of deliberate, heavy footsteps outside his door. Vance pressed his back against the wall, reading the rhythmic disturbance. The footsteps were slow, measured, and unnervingly confident. The man outside was Knuckles Moran, the Maestro's primary enforcer. Knuckles was a legend in the syndicate, known not just for his brutality, but for his uncanny ability to detect spies. He was said to have an intuitive sense for deceit. Vance hadn't made a sound, nor had he used the phone. He realized that Solly Green, the piano player, must have sensed his interest in the sheet music, or perhaps the dissonant F-diminished chord itself was a silent warning signal that the code was compromised. The station escape. Vance slipped out the back window and into the labyrinthine alleys of the city, using the vibrations of the streets to guide him towards the Union Station. He caught sight of Knuckles Moran near the main concourse. Moran was massive, wearing a long trench coat that hid a lethal array of weapons. He wasn't running, he was simply patrolling the entrance, his eyes scanning the crowds with the patient focus of a predator. Vance, unable to hear the clamor of the station, felt the rhythmic churn of the arriving trains, a pulsing, overwhelming noise that masked the subtle vibrations of Moran's movement. He relied on his lip-reading skills and his ability to track the enforcer's shadow. He spotted his train, the Capital Express, waiting on track 9. As he approached the ticket barrier, he saw Moran block his path. Moran didn't shout. He just pointed a massive gloved finger at Vance, and then at the ticket stub in Vance's hand. He was reading Vance's lips as the agent quietly confirmed his destination to the conductor. Moran let a chilling smile spread across his face. "Washington, huh, critic? Heard they got better music there." Moran lunged. Vance, anticipating the blow by tracking the slight shift in the air pressure and the tightening of Moran's coat, dodged the attack.
He spun the rolled-up magazine with the precious sheet music inside over the ticket barrier and onto the platform. A brief, brutal struggle ensued. Vance used his agility, not his strength, slamming Moran's hand into a steel luggage cart. Moran roared silently in frustration, but the fight attracted too much attention. The whistle blew for the Capital Express departure. Vance, bruised but unbroken, sprinted past the barrier and vaulted onto the last carriage just as the train began to move, pulling away from the enraged Knuckles Moran. The secret passenger. Exhausted, Vance collapsed into a first-class compartment, securing the sheet music under his seat. As the train gathered speed, roaring out of Chicago and into the dark Midwest countryside, Vance finally allowed himself a moment of relief. But the relief was fleeting. He looked across the compartment and saw a small, impeccably dressed gentleman sitting alone reading a newspaper. The man wore a distinctive dark velvet smoking jacket, a color rarely seen in public and strongly associated with the syndicate's upper echelon. The man gently lowered his paper and offered a cordial, polite smile. "Rough journey, Mr. Vance," the man said. "The rhythm of the rails can be quite jarring, can't it?" Vance's mind raced. This was no ordinary syndicate flunky. This was a man of power and intellect. "Vance," demanded, his voice low. The man reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of a weapon, he produced a small silver tuning fork. He gently struck the fork against the brass railing of the compartment. Though Vance could not hear the high-pitched ping, he felt the pure, unsettling vibration travel through the seat and into his body. It was an unmistakable frequency, the exact note of the F-diminished chord that Solly Green played to signal danger. "They call me the Maestro," the man replied, his eyes never leaving Vance's face. "And you, Mr. Vance, have found the only flaw in my perfect score." Agent Elias Vance found himself in the most perilous situation of his career, trapped on the Capital Express with the Maestro, the unseen ruler of the Velvet Syndicate, who had revealed himself with the chilling, silent ping of a tuning fork. The rhythmic rumble of the train served as a constant, deafening backdrop to the silent, deadly confrontation. The Maestro's offer. The Maestro remained impossibly calm, leaning forward slightly as the train hurtled through the night. He observed Vance with an air of detached curiosity, as if studying an interesting insect. "You are remarkable, Agent Vance," the Maestro conceded, his voice carrying the smooth, persuasive cadence of a natural leader. "To be deaf, yet to perceive the code in the silence between the beats, it shows a unique, beautiful mind. That symbol pattern, that F-diminished chord?" Vance kept his hand near his hidden pistol. "Your code is exposed." "The Bureau knows nothing yet," the Maestro corrected him, gesturing towards the small, isolated compartment. "Only you and I know, and soon only I will know. You see, I need that sheet music. It is my daily ledger, my key to the entire operation." The Maestro produced a small silver cigarette case and offered Vance a deal. "Join me, Agent Vance. Your skills are too valuable to waste on Hoover's petty bureaucracy. We offer power, security, and wealth beyond your imagination. I can give you the world's most beautiful rhythms." The rhythmic defense. Vance shook his head, refusing the offer. "I don't serve criminals." The Maestro's smile vanished. The attack was swift and entirely unexpected. The Maestro was not a thug like Knuckles Moran. He was a trained, precise killer. He moved silently, utilizing the train's constant motion as both cover and weapon. As the train took a sharp curve, throwing Vance momentarily off balance, the Maestro swept his leg out, tripping Vance toward the door. Vance crashed against the frame, but his unique skill kicked in.
He began to feel the train's vibrational patterns. The rhythmic click-clack of the wheels on the tracks was a constant, predictable 4-beat rhythm. When the maestro moved, his footfalls added a subtle, heavy emphasis to the beat. Vance used this added rhythm to anticipate the maestro's next strike, a low, blinding blow meant to disorient him. Vance ducked, pulling his pistol, but the maestro was too close. In a desperate move, Vance used his rolled-up sheet music as a shield, deflecting the maestro's hand just as the man reached for his own concealed weapon. The two men tumbled into the corridor outside the compartment. The fight became a silent, violent dance dictated by the relentless rhythm of the train. The code's final message. They crashed against the window. The cold, black scenery of the American countryside blurred past them at terrifying speed. The sheet music, which had briefly saved Vance, slipped from his grasp and began to slide down the aisle. The maestro saw his chance and lunged for the music. "Vance!" screamed, the silent word lost in the roar of the train. Just as the maestro reached for the music, Vance noticed a key change in the rhythmic pattern, the train wheels hitting a switch track. There was a sudden, violent side-to-side lurch in the rhythm of the rails, a sharp, unpredictable shift in vibration. Vance knew this change would momentarily disable the maestro, who relied on the predictable linear momentum. Vance used the lurch, driving his body weight against the maestro and forcing the man to slam backward against the wall of the carriage. The impact was brutal. The maestro let out a brief, muffled cry of pain. Vance seized the moment, grabbing his pistol. But the fight was over. The maestro, dazed but conscious, glared at Vance with unyielding hatred. He made no move to attack or escape. Vance retrieved the sheet music and held the gun steady. The maestro shook his head, his eyes fixed on the sheet music in Vance's hand. "You won, Agent. You broke the music." With one final desperate motion, the maestro did not fight Vance, but instead threw himself at the emergency brake cord. The cord snapped, and the sudden violent surge of resistance as the brakes engaged threw Vance against the wall. The impact was brutal. The maestro let out a brief, muffled cry of pain. Vance seized the moment, grabbing his pistol. But the fight was over. The maestro, dazed but conscious, glared at Vance with unyielding hatred. He made no move to attack or escape. Vance retrieved the sheet music and held the gun steady. The maestro shook his head, his eyes fixed on the sheet music in Vance's hand. "You won, Agent. You broke the music." With one final desperate motion, the maestro did not fight Vance, but instead threw himself at the emergency brake cord. The cord snapped, and the sudden violent surge of resistance as the brakes engaged threw Vance against the wall. The entire train began to shriek, grind, and slow down violently, plunging the carriage into chaos. The sudden deceleration was an overwhelming sensory assault on Vance's body. When Vance managed to regain his footing, the maestro was gone. He had smashed open the window during the chaos and leapt from the rapidly slowing train, vanishing into the night. He had sacrificed the element of surprise and his own comfort, but he had escaped capture. Vance stood alone in the wrecked compartment, the sheet music clutched in his hand.
He felt the pure, cold dread. The maestro was still free, and he now knew that the Bureau had the Velvet Code. The game was no longer about deception. It was about deadly, open war. The confrontation with the maestro had confirmed the scale of the threat. The syndicate's leader was highly intelligent, utterly ruthless, and had anticipated every contingency, including his own escape. The Bureau and the skepticism. Vance was immediately ushered into the heavily guarded offices of the Bureau of Investigation. He faced a panel of senior agents who, under the watchful eye of Director J. Edgar Hoover, were skeptical of his claims. Hoover's voice was sharp and dismissive. Vance, speaking clearly and precisely while reading their lips, laid out his evidence. The symbol rhythm acting as the daily transaction code, and the unique dissonant F diminished chord serving as the political encryption key. He then presented the full decryption of the sheet music's first verse. The code detailed not only the funding of Senator Crowley, but also the precise dates and locations for the bribing of 3 key naval yard supervisors in Philadelphia and Boston. "This is not a bootlegging operation, gentlemen," Vance asserted, tapping the decoded section. "The Maestro is gaining control of major maritime distribution points." Hoover, recognizing the explosive political implications, finally conceded. "We will raid the naval yards, but we need the complete picture, Vance. That sheet music has more than one verse. The full ledger." Vance spent the next 48 hours in a secure, soundproofed room, his hands trembling as he worked. He converted every note, every rest, and every cymbal crash into a massive data log. He focused on the most complex, seemingly random sections, the trumpet solo and the chaotic drum fills. He discovered that the final mournful trumpet solo was the true master key. It was a complex polyrhythm that, when translated, revealed a complete list of all of the Velvet Syndicate's major political assets across the East Coast, from judges in New York to customs officials in Miami. But the final measure of the score, a brief drum cadence that closed the song, contained the Syndicate's ultimate objective: Fed Hall. Federal Hall in New York City, Vance realized, staring at the message. The former site of the U.S. Customs House, where the Federal Reserve Bank now has a massive annex.
The syndicate was preparing a sophisticated, massive bank robbery targeting the Federal Reserve in New York, timed to coincide with the installation of their bribed officials in the major ports. The resulting chaos would allow them to seize control of the nation's entire coastal trade. The Maestro's next move. As Vance delivered the full decoded ledger to Hoover, a frantic report was rushed into the room. "Director," a young agent stammered, "the Navy Yard supervisors in Boston and Philadelphia, they were just found. They haven't been bribed or threatened." Vance felt a profound, sickening wave of realization. The Maestro had anticipated the Bureau's move. "He knew we would decode the message," Vance said, his face pale. "He knew Operation Syncopation would target the naval yards." The Maestro had deliberately planted a genuine but secondary target, the naval yards, within the Velvet Code, knowing that once Vance deciphered it, the Bureau would spend its time and resources investigating the ports. He had then eliminated his own pawns to make the threat appear neutralized, thus ensuring the Bureau would look no further. Vance slammed his fist on the table. He wasn't trying to hide the code, he was trying to feed us the wrong solution. The real target is the Federal Hall bank heist in New York, and he has a full day's head start. Fed Hall was not a past transaction. It was the score for his next devastating performance. The music was ending, and the final act of treason was about to begin. The murder of the Naval Yard supervisors confirmed the Maestro's code brilliance. The Velvet Code was not just a ledger, but a sophisticated weapon used to misdirect law enforcement. Agent Vance, now completely trusted by Director Hoover, was given full authority to spearhead the pursuit. See to New York City. The primary target, the massive Federal Reserve Bank annex at Federal Hall, the symbolic heart of American finance. Intelligence suggested the Maestro would use his control over the docks to move heavy equipment and men, preparing for a highly organized military-style penetration of the vault. The Bureau calculated that the heist was planned for Saturday morning, when the hall was closed and the banking district was eerily quiet. Vance spent the journey poring over blueprints of Federal Hall, focusing on its vast labyrinthine vault system. He realized the Maestro wouldn't use brute force.
That would alert the military. He would use precision and stealth, leveraging the Syndicate's network of engineers and safecrackers. He won't use explosives, Vance explained to his team, tracing a line on the vault diagram. The Maestro is about silence, about the invisible blow. The rhythmic defense system. Vance remembered something crucial about the Federal Reserve's security. Its primary defense against safecracking wasn't just steel and concrete, but a complex, early acoustic alarm system. The system was designed to detect the faint, irregular vibrations made by drills or lockpicks, triggering an immediate lockdown. The Maestro knows the acoustic system better than we do, Vance stated. He can't afford a single false vibration. Vance immediately contacted Solly Green, the pianist who wrote Midnight Echo, who was now being held in protective custody. He forced Green to play the F diminished chord repeatedly, Vance asked, reading the musician's lips. Solly, terrified but cooperative, provided the precise mathematical frequency of the dissonant chord, a frequency that Vance realized was not just a code key, but a sonic blueprint. It was the perfect frequency to create resonant vibration within the steel structure of the Federal Hall vault. The Maestro planned to blast the vault open, not with explosives, but with music. The silent attack. Vance and his team entered Federal Hall at 3 a.m. on Saturday. The building was a mausoleum of marble and money, its grand columns casting long, menacing shadows. They descended to the sub-level containing the vault, a massive circular door of thick steel. The alarm system was armed, waiting for the slightest mistake. Vance dismissed his team, insisting he go in alone. This is a rhythmic attack. He pressed his ear against the cold steel of the vault door. He felt the constant low hum of the building's infrastructure, the baseline rhythm of the city's power grid. Then Vance felt it, a second, subtle vibration pulsing against the first. It was perfectly regular, perfectly timed, and perfectly matched to the F diminished chord. The Maestro's team was already inside a neighboring room, operating a powerful, custom-built sonic oscillator to create the resonant frequency. The Maestro was using the Midnight Echo as an actual physical weapon. The rhythmic attack was slowly loosening the complex bolts and tumblers of the vault, silently preparing the way for his safecrackers. Vance raced through the dark, echoing corridors, tracing the source of the vibration. He found the room, a thick, heavy-duty service closet directly adjacent to the vault. Inside, two Syndicate engineers, wearing heavy gloves to dampen their own vibrations, were operating the machine. Vance burst in, pistol drawn. The engineers immediately went for their weapons, but they hesitated when they saw Vance. They weren't criminals, they were mechanics, recruited for their sonic expertise. Vance didn't waste time on threats. He slammed his body into the sonic oscillator. The machine bucked and screamed, and the F diminished frequency shattered, replaced by a random, violent dissonance. Back at the vault, the acoustic alarm system, suddenly overwhelmed by the chaotic, broken frequency, finally engaged. The Federal Hall went into immediate total lockdown. Vance had stopped the silent rhythm, but the Maestro had one last card to play. As the heavy steel doors of the vault slammed shut, sealing the complex, Vance felt a new, chilling vibration. The sound of a phone ringing in the service closet, a phone that had been perfectly silent until the very moment the lockdown was triggered. Vance grabbed the receiver. A familiar, cultured voice came through the line, calm despite the chaos. The Maestro. "Mr. Vance, beautiful dissonance. You stopped my score, but you forgot the curtain call. Your victory just trapped us both. Check your watch, Agent." Agent Elias Vance gripped the telephone receiver, the Maestro's voice chillingly calm amidst the deafening wail of the Federal Hall alarms. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The Federal Hall raid was never the primary target. It was the Maestro's ultimate diversionary chord. The real target? The gold reserve. "You focused on the money, Mr. Vance," the Maestro's voice purred over the line. "You saw the code, and you saw the biggest vault." Vance immediately understood the context. Every Saturday morning, under extreme security, a massive shipment of gold bullion from the New York Federal Reserve's primary reserve was transported by armored truck to the Federal Hall Annex for temporary storage before being dispersed. Vance shouted into the phone. "Precisely," the Maestro confirmed. "The lockdown pulls every guard, every police cruiser, and every federal resource to your little marble mausoleum. Meanwhile, the docks are unguarded. I didn't need the money inside the hall, Agent." The Maestro's ultimate goal was not a complex vault heist, but a simple, ruthless highway robbery executed under the cover of a massive federal security crisis. Vance checked his watch. It was 4:05 a.m. The final rhythm. Vance smashed the phone down and burst out of the Federal Hall Annex. He ignored the frantic security guards and commandeered the fastest bureau car. "New York docks," he yelled to the accompanying agent. They sped through the silent streets of the financial district, the sirens of the Federal Hall lockdown fading behind them. When they reached Pier 17, the scene was chaos, but not the chaos of battle, the cold, efficient chaos of a well-planned heist. The armored truck was immobilized, its tires slashed. The gold shipment, dozens of wooden crates containing heavy gold bars, was being loaded onto a sleek, powerful rum-running speedboat docked at the pier. And, standing on the gangplank, supervising the final loading, was the Maestro. He was no longer the polite intellectual. He wore practical sailing gear, a look of focused victory on his face. Vance jumped from the car, pistol drawn. "Stop, Maestro!" The Maestro didn't flinch. He simply smiled and reached into his jacket pocket. This time, he pulled out a small, polished wooden flute. He raised the flute and played a single, piercing, high-pitched trill, a rhythmic call that was instantly answered by the sound of approaching police whistles and footsteps. The last note. Vance realized the Maestro hadn't just used the lockdown to pull away federal agents. He had simultaneously called in a false alarm on the docks, using the local precinct's non-syndicate officers as yet another layer of distraction. As the honest NYPD officers rushed in, they saw Vance and his team, federal agents dressed in civilian clothes, holding guns on a well-dressed man on a boat, while a massive amount of gold was being loaded. "Federal agents!" the NYPD captain shouted, drawing his weapon. Vance was trapped, caught between the police and the Maestro. "Checkmate, Agent Vance," the Maestro whispered, stepping onto the speedboat. But Vance knew one last desperate rhythmic trick. He slammed the heel of his boot repeatedly against the metal pier deck, creating a loud, irregular rhythmic thumping, a sound that could be felt through the deck and heard over the whistles. He focused the rhythmic force directly at the nearest crates. One of the hastily loaded wooden crates, heavy with gold, teetered precariously on the edge of the pier. The Maestro saw Vance's intention and lunged for the crate. Vance slammed his boot one last time. The rhythmic vibration was too much. The crate tumbled into the icy water with a deafening splash, followed by two more. The sinking crates momentarily stunned everyone. The loss of the gold was massive, but the loud, non-musical splash broke the spell of the silent confrontation. "The gold is sinking," Vance yelled, pointing at the speedboat, hoping his lip movement and gesture would be understood by the NYPD captain. The police finally realized the chaos was deliberate. They turned their attention to the speeding boat. The Maestro, losing a third of his loot, screamed in frustration. He tossed the flute into the water and ordered his driver to full throttle. Epilogue: The silence of victory. The Maestro escaped into the pre-dawn darkness, but his power was broken. The loss of the gold, combined with the earlier neutralization of his political network through the partial decoding of the Velvet Code, crippled the Syndicate's ability to fund its political machine. The full Velvet Code ledger, later recovered from the Maestro's accountant, allowed the Bureau to dismantle the entire political criminal network over the next year. Agent Elias Vance was hailed as the hero who saved the nation's financial integrity. He was promoted and put in charge of a new unit focused entirely on analyzing patterns and criminal logistics. Vance never regained his hearing, but he never needed to. He had proven that the world spoke a language beyond sound, a language of rhythm, vibration, and silence. And he was the only man who could perfectly read the final secret score of the American underworld. The morning following the debacle at Pier 17 was a flurry of chaotic action and cold analysis. While the NYPD and the FBI recovered the sunken gold crates from the frigid New York harbor, Agent Elias Vance was confined to a secure office at the Bureau's New York field station. His victory was tactical, but his failure to capture the Maestro was viewed by Hoover as a critical lapse. The agent's burden. Vance, physically intact but mentally exhausted, was questioned relentlessly.
The agents focused on his decision to intentionally create dissonance at Federal Hall and his final desperate rhythmic attack on the dock, which cost the Bureau valuable gold, even though it crippled the Maestro's escape. Vance found the inquiries frustrating. To him, the rhythmic defense was logical. To the Bureau, it was an eccentric risk taken by a death agent. The Maestro doesn't think like a criminal, gentleman, Vance explained, translating his thoughts through rapid lip movements. He thinks like an architect. He doesn't smash a wall, he finds the structural frequency that makes the wall crumble silently. The pressure was amplified by Vance's own internal struggles. His hearing loss wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a constant source of mental strain. He relied entirely on his vision and vibration sense, meaning his perception of the world was always fragmented, often leading to a profound sense of isolation, a silence that mirrored the Maestro's deadly subtlety. The ledger revealed the depth of the Maestro's organization, which was structured less like a gang and more like a corporation. The most important discovery in the ledger was the name of the organization's chief financial officer and logistics coordinator, a man named Howard Taft, who operated out of Philadelphia. Taft was not a thug. He was a former high-ranking Wall Street accountant who had disappeared after the 1929 market crash. Vance realized that while the Maestro was the visionary, Taft was the engineer who made the impossible rhythms work. Taft is the one who designed the sonic oscillator, Vance deduced. He understands the accounting rhythm of money, the daily flow, the weekly peaks, the seasonal troughs. The ledger showed that Taft had recently begun transferring massive amounts of liquid assets out of high-profile banks and into obscure, small-town mutual savings funds across Pennsylvania and New Jersey, banks that were almost entirely unregulated. The Maestro is changing his rhythm, Vance explained to his team leader, Agent Cooper. He's not going for one big score now. He's breaking his gold into 1,000 tiny beats to make it untraceable. The key in the jazz standard. Vance returned to the Midnight Echo sheet music. He focused on the composer Solomon Solly Green, the piano player still under protective custody. Vance believed Green, though terrified, held an unconscious key. Vance traveled back to Chicago to meet with Green. The pianist, a meek, nervous man, insisted he was just the composer who sold his popular song to the Maestro years ago. The F diminished chord, Solly, Vance pressed, communicating through writing. Why that chord? Solly looked at Vance, his eyes wide. It wasn't supposed to be wrong, Agent. I wrote the song for my wife, Eliza. She worked in the garment district. Vance instantly felt a surge of recognition. The F diminished chord wasn't just a code key. It was the Maestro's emotional signature, a painful memory woven into his masterpiece of crime. "Tell me about Eliza's workplace," Vance urged. Solly revealed that Eliza worked in the garment district lofts in Philadelphia, specifically a building owned by a shell company. Vance immediately cross-referenced this with the ledger. The shell company was owned by Howard Taft. The hidden vault in the factory. The final piece clicked into place. The Maestro hadn't escaped to a hidden island. He had escaped to the financial hub of his engineer, Howard Taft, in Philadelphia. The garment district lofts weren't just a factory. They were a large industrial space with heavy machinery. Vance knew that a constant low-frequency industrial vibration from the looms and motors could easily mask the rhythmic sound of a sonic oscillator or a safecracker. "The Maestro and Taft are in Philadelphia," Vance declared. "They're not moving money out of those small banks yet. They are consolidating it." The next target wasn't a bank heist. It was the capture of the syndicate's entire liquid treasury before Taft could finalize its dispersal. Vance had to penetrate the heart of the Maestro's operational silence and break his financial rhythm forever. Agent Elias Vance, carrying the weight of the Bureau's desperate hope, arrived in Philadelphia. His target, the sprawling, noise-filled industrial labyrinth of the garment district lofts, now confirmed as the Maestro's new financial headquarters. This was the Maestro's new blue chord, a speakeasy disguised by the deafening rhythm of commerce. Infiltration and the masking noise. The garment district was a sensory nightmare for the average person, but a map of rhythmic clarity for Vance. The air vibrated with the continuous heavy thrumming of industrial looms, sewing machines, and massive heating systems. This constant, predictable industrial noise was precisely what Howard Taft, the syndicate's engineer, used to mask his activities.
Vance infiltrated the factory building after midnight, posing as a night shift maintenance worker. The security was decentralized, relying on the assumption that no one would dare look for a secret vault amidst such a cacophony of sound. He moved through the dark floors, following the dissonance, the subtle rhythmic breaks and shifts that did not align with the machinery's regular pulse. He realized the Maestro and Taft were not relying on sound deadening, but on sound confusion. Vance eventually tracked the rhythmic anomaly to the boiler room in the sub-basement. The room was dominated by two enormous rumbling heating boilers. Yet behind the boilers, the rhythm felt wrong. It was too clean, too contained. He discovered a false wall, cleverly masked by steam pipes, vibrating at a slightly different frequency than the rest of the room. It wasn't the sound of the boilers. It was the soft, rhythmic click of a counting machine, a machine counting massive amounts of currency. The accountant and the vault. Vance breached the false wall and entered a small, brightly lit inner room. It was not a grand vault like Federal Hall, but a makeshift, high-security financial hub. The walls were lined with thousands of account ledgers, and in the center stood Howard Taft, meticulously counting stacks of bills using an adding machine. Taft, thin and precise, looked up from his work, his expression showing minimal surprise. He wasn't armed, but he was surrounded by financial devastation. "Agent Vance," Taft said, his voice quiet, almost bored. "The man who reads rhythm. The Maestro warned me you'd be following the broken beat of the F-diminished chord." On the far wall of the room, built right into the brick foundation, was a freshly poured concrete vault, smaller than a bank vault, but clearly designed to be permanent and undetectable. Taft was moments away from sealing the final massive transfer of syndicate funds into this new silent treasury. "Vance," demanded, his pistol steady. Taft calmly placed his hand on the final stack of bills, a fortune in illicit cash. "The Maestro is already gone, Agent. He completed his goal. He broke the Treasury's faith in the American banking system." "I stop you here," Vance asserted. "The ledger is useless without the cash." Taft smiled, a cold, empty expression. "You are focused on the cash, Agent. That is your mistake. You still think in terms of robbery."
The ultimate financial weapon. Taft grabbed a key from his desk and pointed to a large metallic device covered by a tarp in the corner. The Maestro knew you would get the ledger. Taft ripped the tarp away, revealing a massive, custom-built, industrial-sized printing press. This wasn't a counterfeiting operation. It was something far more dangerous. "This is our future," Taft announced proudly. The Maestro used the gold he did move along with the ledger's secrets to acquire this machine and secure the necessary paper and ink. "This press isn't printing cash, Agent." Taft explained his genius. The Syndicate had just completed a massive campaign of financial sabotage, using their bribed officials to devalue specific, legitimate stock holdings. They were now using the illegally printed certificates and bonds, backed by the Maestro's gold, to buy up the entire devalued market at rock-bottom prices. "When the economy recovers," Taft said with chilling finality, "the Syndicate will own half of the industrial infrastructure of the Northeast. We don't need to steal money, Agent Vance." Taft pressed a single button on his adding machine, and the newly poured concrete vault door began to slide shut, about to seal the printing press and the Syndicate's financial future forever. Vance was facing the end of the line, a self-sealing financial fortress and the ultimate weapon of economic warfare. The new concrete vault door was a slow, inexorable enemy. It was designed to slide silently into place, sealing the printing press, the illegal bonds, and Howard Taft, the financial brain of the Syndicate, inside a fortress that no law enforcement could breach without days of demolition. The race against the seal. Agent Vance knew he couldn't stop the massive electrically driven door with brute force. He had seconds before the Syndicate's financial future was locked away forever. Vance yelled, his pistol unwavering. Taft, completely calm, ignored the threat. "It's an automated sequence, Agent. The Maestro prepared for everything. Once the process starts, the vault seals. My fortune is secure." Vance glanced at the gap. Only about 3 feet remained before the seal was complete. He had to think in terms of rhythm and vibration, his only advantage over the heavily armored room. He remembered the Maestro's technique at Federal Hall, the use of resonant frequency to create structural weakness. If the Maestro could use a sound to loosen the vault's bolts, Vance could use a sound to jam the hydraulic system powering the door. Vance lowered his pistol, not surrendering, but shifting his focus entirely to the room's complex internal rhythms. He pressed his ear against the metal casing of the industrial adding machine where Taft was conducting his final counts. He felt the quick, predictable clack-clack-clack of the machine's inner workings, a perfect high-frequency beat. He needed to find a counter rhythm that would cause a mechanical feedback loop in the hydraulic lines driving the vault. The counter rhythm of chaos. Vance spotted his target, a large exposed steel air conditioning vent running along the floor, positioned directly above the hydraulic lines. The vent was a perfect conduit for vibration. He raised his foot and began to strike the vent repeatedly with the hard heel of his boot, not wildly, but with a deliberate, calculated rhythm. He didn't care about the volume, he cared about the timing, a precise offbeat rhythm designed to conflict with the hydraulic motor's smooth, low frequency. He struck the vent in rapid, syncopated triplets, dum-ta-ta, dum-ta-ta. The rhythmic impact was devastating.
The steel vent began to hum violently, sending chaotic, clashing vibrations into the hydraulic system. Taft, who had been watching Vance with dismissive amusement, suddenly looked alarmed. He could feel the floor vibrating uncontrollably. "Taft!" cried, jumping away from the adding machine. The grinding sound of the massive vault door changed. The smooth thrum of the hydraulic system was replaced by a screaming mechanical protest. The door, now only inches from fully sealing, ground to a halt. Smoke began to curl from the hydraulic housing embedded in the wall. Vance had successfully introduced a perfect dissonance, forcing the synchronized rhythm of the machine to break down. The final bargain. Taft realized that Vance's peculiar disability was, in fact, his greatest strength. The vault was jammed, the printing press was exposed, and the entire syndicate treasury was now within reach of the Bureau. In a desperate final move, Taft grabbed a heavy antique brass stamp used for sealing official documents and hurled it at Vance. Vance, still focused on maintaining his counter-rhythm, was forced to duck. He lost his pistol in the scramble. Taft used the diversion to race towards the stuck vault door.
He didn't try to force it open. He slammed his hand against a concealed kill switch located beside the door frame. Taft screamed over the mechanical noise, "But the Maestro is free!" Taft had initiated a final catastrophic failsafe. A mass exodus of every politician and official on the syndicate's payroll, flooding the northern cities with suddenly untraceable fugitives and crashing the fragile political system. Vance knew he couldn't stop the protocol, but he still had the mastermind. He lunged at Taft, tackling the accountant before he could destroy the physical ledgers. The fight was brief and desperate. Vance, using his agility, pinned Taft against the hydraulic casing. "The Maestro is nothing without your math, Taft," Vance gasped, pinning the accountant with the full weight of his body. "You are the real rhythm of the syndicate." Taft, defeated, merely looked at the hydraulic casing, which was now vibrating with a terrible continuous shudder. "He's going to the only place you can't follow, Agent." Agent Vance proved that history isn't just about what we hear, but what we feel. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a beat of hidden history.